Full year after their debut, Scream Bloody Gore, the band Death entered the studio once again, very eager to release their second album, which would be entitled Leprosy and be released in 1988. This is an album that actually built off of the momentum that they begun with Scream Bloody Gore. It would maintain the death metal stylings that the previous album was able to boast. However, you could almost see in Leprosy, or should I say hear in Leprosy, the evolutions that may come later on in their career. There's a little bit more of a technical aspect of this particular release, this 8-track, 36 to 37 minute long affair, which, by comparison to the previous album, was a little bit shorter, but it definitely did not dwindle in the intensity. If anything, it cranked it up a little bit, and did so in a unique way. Instead of becoming faster, as I had mentioned earlier, it got more technical, it got a little bit more crisp, a little bit more tight, and you could see the band's maturity blossoming really right in front of you. This was one of those albums that, once again, however, is a curious case with a lot of fans. It's one where some of them will boast it to be amongst their favorite Death albums, whereas others will say, well, it's just okay. I guess that's the case with any record. However, with this one, it's one that is puzzling to me. I can understand where both sides are kind of going with this particular opinion. However, I feel that this album boasts both sides almost to a perfectionary level. There are songs on here that seem to drone on a little bit or just seem a little out of place. And I'll be the first one to say that I wasn't a very huge fan of the self-titled track. It's grown on me a little bit over the years. However, whenever I first listened to it, I thought to myself, it's alright. This is an album that's not filled with that, however. This is not an album that, by any stretch of the imagination, is filled with cuts that are similar in nature. In fact, if anything, the variance in the speed and the tempo is a little bit more apparent than it was in Scream Bloody Gore, once again showing the band's maturity happening right before our eyes, or right before our ears. This is another album that's full with classics that you could hear throughout the band's career, especially in the live experience. You're going to hear a lot of technical riffing, and the soloing becomes a little bit closer to the level that we became very familiar with throughout Death's quote-unquote classic run in the 1990s. Leprosy, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people, could be seen as an important stepping stone to finally reach that plateau. Death metal had already started to catch on. There were already bands that wanted to be just like this particular group, or there were already bands that were already alongside them in this particular genre that were beginning to put their feet forward towards getting their own releases heard, or were already making waves in the market. Death always was the band that seemed to be ahead of the pace. Always seemed to be the band that was one step ahead. And with this technical offering in Leprosy, it put the benchmark up a little bit higher, mainly because it expanded the horizons of the genre as a whole. To have that happen only 2 albums in, as opposed to maybe 5 or 6, is quite a bold leap to begin with. What would come after this would be based around what had happened before. It seems like something that should be so obvious whenever you're creating music that you should evolve your sound from the previous releases into your next one and only make it better. Only serve to create the more perfect album than you had created before. With Leprosy, they didn't necessarily top Scream Bloody Gore in many fans' opinions. However, in mine, they're about par with each other. What they did do was, they ushered in the potential for a whole wealth of possibility. Consider where death metal is today, and consider where death metal was in 1988 whenever Leprosy was released by Death. Consider all the evolutions in the genre ever since that day, and you start to see that this is another important piece of the death metal puzzle. One that, well, was really started right whenever death metal started. Technical death metal is something that, well, a lot of bands embrace to this day. Back in this particular era, it was something that was not even in its infancy. In fact, it may not have even have reached its inception point. Well, maybe Leprosy could be seen as the first album to really gear and turn towards those technical varieties. Only it didn't take it to the extremes that we see today. It was the first album that really displayed those little points where you could see a budding genre just waiting to happen. Leprosy's importance to the Death discography, not only that, but also to the heavy metal world, will be in the fact that 2 albums in, Death seemed to be getting tighter as a group. Personnel is personnel, but sound is sound. Just wait for a couple of albums here, and you'll start to really hear me praise. Leprosy, while I find to be about an 8.5 as its predecessor, Scream Bloody Gore, was, its importance, well, it's actually going to be seen a little bit further down the road. So if you don't feel that Leprosy is a great release, if you feel that it's just average, listen to it again with your history in mind. If you already feel that it's a fantastic album, listen to it again. Make this Leprosy Day. It sounds awful considering yesterday was Mother's Day, but just roll with it. Next time, we're going to tackle spiritual healing. You're not going to want to miss that.